Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 3 of the OMNIA Performance Podcast. I'm Fergus Crawley, and this is
Jonny Payne.
And we are going to run through a bit of a debrief of Project Vertical for those that haven't yet heard one or are not aware what it is.
Do you remember Project Vertical?
Project what?
Vertical. Do you remember? I do. Pretty horrible.
No, but we're going to remind everyone today, aren't we? It was horrible. It was horrible. But before we go any further, a couple of housekeeping requests, if you don't mind, which you won't because I'm asking very nicely. Thank you. Please, whatever platform you're listening on, make sure to hit the follow or subscribe button. Make sure to rate and review the show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, and make sure to rate the show if you're listening on just Spotify. And if you're watching our handsome faces as we look into a projector monitor at the moment, then please hit the subscribe button down below, as that will make us very pleased, and you can now see all episodes, hear all episodes moving forward. So everybody's having a good time.
That was to indicate a good time.
Jonny forgot that podcasts are primarily a audio
for those,
medium, so he put his hands in the air to celebrate without any woo. Do it again with woo. Okay, thank you for doing all those things. We really do appreciate it. Today we are going to work through Project Vertical bit by bit. So we're going to talk through what it was. For those that might not be aware, we're going to break through a bit of the challenges that came with the prep and the planning. We are going to talk through the training approach and considerations when preparing for an 11-day up and down a big hill consideration. We're going to work through the event itself. We're going to work through the highs and lows, the nutrition considerations, or lack thereof as the project developed, and then the reflections there were some, yeah. The reflections that we had along the way, and more importantly, the reflections that we've had since that we now sort of consider on a day-to-day basis as it changed us as people and our relationship, friend to friend, professional to professional, coach to athlete, and vice versa, in more than one way across the board. Then we're going to run through the community impact and the community importance, because it was very much not a project that was just underpinned by the pair of us. There was a much wider team, and that ultimately made it a much more valuable project. So, Jonny, what was Project Vertical? Go.
Project Vertical was a nightmare. It really wasn't, actually. We'll come to that probably. But Project Vertical essentially was we gave ourselves a window of 11 days in order to accumulate a vertical marathon in accumulated gains. So we set ourselves the task of climbing Ben Nevis. How many feet is Ben Nevis?
It's 1,352 metres on the mountain path.
There you go. So we had to do that.
Can you tell I went up it 22 times in 11 days?
Well, I did too. I don't remember that, so there's something different about us. But the ultimate goal was to accumulate that marathon total, which meant we had to summit Nevis 32 times. Is that correct? Yes.
It was 31.2.
0.2, that's right. Yeah. So we were going to end up there 32 times. But some of it was
so the aim was 42,200 metres of vertical gain accumulated across 11 days. And 11 days, for reference, was because we had a lot of support from military, brands and communities, which meant we wanted to try and finish at 11 a.m. on the 11th to honour Remembrance Day. And also in terms of budget, time away from families, time away from jobs. I was still working full-time for somebody else at the time. 11 days was all we could really manage.
Yeah,
so
that was the largest scope of the project that we felt was really possible. Anything beyond that, and it was probably going to start to eat itself a little bit from a financial perspective. In which case,
as you did, by not eating enough food. But we'll get on to that.
Let's get to that at some point. But yeah, that was the goal. And I suppose before we came here to do this today, we discussed whether we had discussed this at any length before, and we haven't really. We've discussed many aspects of it, but we've never done this kind of full Project Vertical autopsy, I suppose, because what had happened after Project Vertical was the same as happened to everybody else. We really got swallowed up by the pandemic and the lockdown, and we did a few reviews. We did some lovely reviews with some podcasts that we were on. Gaz helped us talk through some of the Julius May.
Well, he helped us psychologically decompress as well, which is a huge part of this. We'll get onto the almost post-event depression, as I've coined it on social media before.
It was certainly there, but we've never really kind of broken it down in the way that we'd like to today. So this is useful for us as much as it hopefully is of interest to people. We still get questions in any Q&As that we both put up, and still get DMs asking questions about, and we hope we're going to cover that off today, asking questions about Project Vertical.
So the intention really was, it was a Movember project, so the thinking was I'd always had the idea of how to incorporate the Scottish Mountains into one of my charity projects for Movember. Jonny and I spend an awful lot of time in the hills, so it was something that was really quite profound and important to us. And then one day, Jonny, once I put this idea to him, said, well, surely with the whole message being around not suffering through challenges together, I should come along for the ride with you. And I thought, on your head be it, but please do.
Yeah, that was stupid.
That was stupid, but we wouldn't have been able to get nearly as far as we did without that support, and I think that really sang true to the message.
I do wish that we'd tried to focus the whole thing around selfishness. That would have been good, because I could selfishly have not done that.
Yes, but then I would have had a really, really bad time.
Yeah.
A worse time, in fact. But nonetheless, the intention was to encourage others to climb your own mountain, climb their own mountain, because we wanted to play on the theme of the false summits, the peaks and troughs, the highs and lows, the unpredictable conditions of weather. Basically use the mountain as a metaphor for the mental health of the nation. Movember is a men's mental health charity, so we were obviously focused on that side of things. And then there was a huge fundraising element to it. So we had some mechanics for people to get involved, mechanics for people to get involved remotely, mechanics for people to climb their own mountain in their own capacity. And the community support was incredible. We raised just shy of 50 grand in the duration of the project. So we actually went on, before day one of the mountain, we managed to raise £10,000, which was absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And at that point, we could have done a runner, but instead we didn't. We just walked slowly up and down a hill for 11 days.
Very short run.
Yeah, very short-lived. Yeah, but that was the premise. So for us, it was us putting ourselves out of our comfort zone to almost confront and present ourselves in a vulnerable position to try and encourage other men to have more conversations, to climb their own mountain, climb your own mountain, and really buy into the ethos and message of the project, which we think landed really well. But there was an awful lot of work that went into making that so, and I think that's something that we're very keen to get across, because it wasn't a, right, let's pack up the bags and go to Fort William next week and see what happens. It started in January of 2020, if not December, really.
Yeah, I think probably even as far back as the December. Certainly, the seeds were being sown in 2019, and yeah, you mentioned it the other day, and I went away afterwards. I agreed, and we chatted about it briefly. But afterwards, you had said it's difficult for people to understand that it was 9, 10, maybe even pushing on for 11 months of planning, of talking to people, of putting things in place, of trying to figure stuff out without the experiential retrospective knowledge that we have now. How is it going to go? Who are the people that we need? And a lot of that was, nobody had done anything like this before. People have done things that have similar aspects and similar mechanics, and we were able to find those people and lean on their expertise, but nobody had done this before. So yeah, looking back on it, the 11 days that we were up and down the mountain were, a small percentage of the amount of effort that went into that particular project. And beyond the planning as well, when you think back on it, that was 9, 10 months, if not more, of a slow adrenal burn, where, as we get closer and closer to the project, this whole thing was kind of marching up or looming in the rear view mirror. And by the time we got there, we were almost psychologically knackered.
We were done in. I mean,
it was a lot of work.
I was working full time for Vivo Barefoot at the time, as well as putting out 18 to 24-hour training weeks. You were in the same capacity you are now from a coaching point of view.
Trying to run a full-time business on my own at that point, 4 children,
It was horrendous. I'm looking back. It's funny because reflecting on it now, I'm thinking, how on earth did we make that happen? But the bottom line is, we really cared about it. It was really important to us, which meant weekends at the pub, weekends playing golf, for example, with me. I haven't played golf in a long time, to be fair. Weird analogy, but here we are. I should play more golf. But we sacrificed things because we were really invested in the project. We were really invested in the message. We really wanted to commit to it because people started to understand the message. And I think the whole concept of the project, it managed to hit home or ring true with the people we're speaking to. So we quickly gathered some momentum from initial conversations. And then we faced the first real challenge, which was, right, how do we fund this? Mm-hmm. Which is a commercial consideration, which is an interesting one because it's coming from a charitable point of view. What is the donation? What is funding the project? How much do we need to get to be able to make this happen without incurring costs? Because for full transparency, the first 2 years of Movember project cost me about $7,500 to make happen. So whilst the first 2 years raised just over 50 grand, there was a significant personal investment for me to be able to get to that point of view. Yeah. And I knew it would be foolish of me to continue to relatively do that over time. So we had to find a way of making this work with the investment and the support of others. So that was the big challenge and the big, scary, stressful challenge. And that's why having Jonny on board from a one event point of view was amazing, but two from a, right, let's become a team and make this happen. It was really when we started to sow the seeds as well of thinking, right, it's about time that we start to move into a long-term business, which is now OMNIA. So I think the whole process from a professional commercial point of view for us has been very valuable, and we've built some great relationships with others along the way as well.
Oh, we certainly found whether we could work together or not. That's if there was ever a pressure test,
we're testing. Yeah. Baptism by inferno, not even fire. That is the fires of Hades and hell combined, which I think are the same thing, but just in a different language. But imagine they're separate things, and then you combine them. That's how fiery it was.
You got a theology degree. You're just floating different. Forget it.
Yeah, I was the philosophy of religion. So if anybody wants to talk about an academic dick measuring contents of how the same say the same thing in a very convoluted way, I'm your man.
Good idea. So prep and planning. Let's kind of cover off what we did and how we managed to get ourselves to the point. I mean, it would be very difficult really to lay out that whole, let's call it 10 months for the sake of kind of keeping guessing or approximating it. What do you think that the key difficulties? Let's look at it as hardships.
Yep.
The key points the key stages that we had to hit in order to make it move on to the next stage were what?
So first of all, we needed to get the sort of the product, I'd say, firmed up, which was the concept, the messaging, the execution plan, the bare bones, the skeleton of the project. How many buzzwords can I chuck at you?
So essentially, what is it?
If
we're trying to describe it to somebody else, we've both given our kind of a high level, this is what Project Vertical was, but if you're saying to somebody, we would like you to invest in this.
Yeah, so that was number one, wasn't it?
We needed to make sure that they could see it very plainly. So you created a media deck.
Yeah, just a deck that ran through our thoughts. Part two was then getting partners on board that bought into the project on premise, and then ticking off the kit requirements, sort of media requirements, any PR that we could get, just starting to get a bit of a feel for it. So there was a few months of kind of putting feelers out there, building relationships, starting conversations, and then seeing where it started to stick. And then we got to around April, May time, we thought, oh, actually, this isn't ages away. And that's where we started to having to do sort of part three, which is the financial considerations. How much is this going to cost? What are we going to require? What is it going to cost us personally? What do we already have? Who do we need to reach out to? Can they provide kit as well as finances? Is this a viable proposition? How do we make sure that this is marketable and involves community to have the maximum interaction as well? But the one thing that we really did go into it with was that we would only work with brands, and brands would only buy into it really if they understood that there was a genuine investment in the cause to make their investment worthwhile. And the brands that all came on board ultimately said that there was no KPIs or no marketing that they expected as a result of it. They were bought in because they liked the premise, they liked the product being, what is it? And they liked the way it was being delivered and the community interaction, and they just want to be a part of it, which is incredible, really. So we're eternally indebted and grateful to those
very
guys.
Much so. Ultimately, we were lucky, really, to we worked hard to find the brands, and we threw like a lovely domino effect through one particular individual, maybe then introducing us to other individuals, etc. We then managed to get brands on board, as you say, who believed in the message.
But it wasn't a case of we need 10 grand. Oh, we have 10 grand. It was nothing like that at all.
It couldn't be that, could it?
We had a lot of ups and downs. We won't go into details because it's kind of irrelevant details. But we had moments where we thought we had everything covered, and then that was pulled through. We had moments where we had something covered, and then it kind of magnified, and then other considerations came along. Even down to when we were in the car up to Fort William on the way 2 days before we started, we then found out that apparently there was a permit for filming up there, which was going to cost us thousands and thousands of pounds. We then very, very kindly, thank you to Gemma Highland Estates, they waived that fee. But when you get a phone call 2 days before you're meant to start an 11-day ultra being told that you're going to owe somebody $6 grand that hadn't been accounted for, that is going to have to come from somewhere, the fear starts to set in. And again, it's just oh God. We'd had, but again, this goes back to if you listen back to episode 2 where we talk about the benefits of ultra marathons and why we think everybody should do one. This is one of those things where I got that phone call. It would have been very easy to flat, but I was almost so desensitized to those obstacles by this point and through the process of getting to that point that it was just another bump in the road. And it made me a lot more pragmatic about putting it to Jonny, putting it to the team, and understanding where to go next. So finances were a big thing, but they ultimately worked themselves out. A lot of hard work, a lot of conversations, a lot of reproposing, a lot of thinking outside the box to get there, but it did work in the end. Part 4 is the team. We obviously knew there were some people that wanted to get involved. We knew we needed somebody to project manage. Shout out to Doug Crawford, the real hero of the project.
Doug Crawford. Yeah.
And then there were a whole load of other people that came along and supported in a variety of roles. But that was essential because if you're going to spend 11 days in the Highlands with somebody where your sole purpose is to go up and down a big hill, you're going to need to get on with them. Otherwise, we're going to be exhausted and having to go at them. They're not going to want to help us, etc., etc. So a lot of nuances to consider. And this was alongside the demands of day-to-day life, day-to-day training. And then the elephant in the room, how are we going to train for something that's completely unknown? And you and I sat down and sort of sketched out what we thought was logical and started to sort of get to work. But then the curveball was thrown in that I decided that I wanted to race for the 500-pound squat and sub 5-minute mile in the same day. So that somewhat got in the way of my training structure in terms of my volume, because we dropped it for a month or so to make sure that could happen. But overall, the training approach was we wanted to get as robust physically as we could. We wanted to get a little bit heavier, and we wanted to basically really hammer through sort of a lunging range of motion from a strength point of view, from a unilateral point of view, and get as strong, hold on to as much strength as we could whilst really ramping up our aerobic base in the hills specifically.
I think what's interesting to note, and from a programming perspective, I've thought about this many times since. I think at that point, a lot of the responsibility, if you like, although it was very collaborative, but really I was trying to write that program blind, and how do we do this? And we eventually stumbled across is completely the wrong way to put it. We eventually settled on the idea that actually there's no way to train for this. What we need to do, as you've just said, is train for the specific mechanics of it, which is obviously going to be climbing, step after step after step, and train in order to be as robust as possible for it. And go back to that ultramarathon episode that we've just finished, or episode 2, and we can look on sort of certain parts of that as having been experiential learning that lent itself to this. But ultimately, you can't train for that. What we did find was that aerobically, day 5 and day 6, we actually got a little bit stronger, didn't we?
There was a hyper-adaptation effect, wasn't there?
We were being exposed to that kind of thing over and over. And I think many people who've run marathons back-to-back, we tried to liaise with people who'd done things that were similar to that and eke as much as we could out of their training history and their training experience as we could and apply it to our own. But then obviously ours was relatively unique.
The closest we found, wasn't it, was through GAS and Special Forces selection. Just the relentless, repetitive.
It's the repetitive
demand.
nature of it, and the understanding that we both had from previous things that that psychologically it was going to be the biggest demand, and we'll come on to that. But I don't think we could have done anything different, frankly. I think that there were things that we discovered during the event that we hadn't thought were going to be as bad, but
things that were significantly worse.
But I don't think there's anything we could have done in training that would have mitigated that.
No.
For instance,
we got to the point where we summited Ben Nevis 3 times in one day, which was dawn till dusk in training, and that was sort of as the weather was still decent. So we were fighting through truckloads of people that had driven up from Birmingham, Liverpool, and there was congestion on the mountain. So we had a real psychological, get out our way, we're doing 3 in a day sort of stuff going on. But at the end of the day, we have no more right to be on that hill than anyone else. So it just gave...
I own it now.
Oh, yes. No, I'm king of Ben Nevis on Strava, Johnny. What's he talking about? He owns it. I've got the Strava KOM. Fool. Anyway, we had the psychological demand that came from that additional stress and the training fatigue. But once you've done Ben Nevis 3 times in a day, you know it well enough. You know you've got it in your legs. But going up and doing it again the following day 3 times, all you're really doing then is accumulating fatigue and putting yourself through demand and wear and tear that isn't probably going to actually adapt you any closer to the end goal required, other than potentially shift you towards injury risk and just relentless rock pounding through going up and down over and over again. Because the descents, as we very quickly learned as the 11 days unfolded, were really what began to ruin us. And if we'd done a lot more descending in training, maybe we could have prepared on these a little bit more. But I don't think we could have done, really.
We'd have just put ourselves through misery beforehand that we might have recognised a bit, but it wouldn't have stopped it. I don't think so.
No.
But I suppose that leads us kind of neatly, a little bit of the training discussed there, but the event itself, we have as a kind of a, let's run through that.
Yeah.
So day 1, we had planned to start...
At midnight.
We thought we'll cover off the first, certainly the first ascent, maybe the second half, the second summit.
We were trying to get 3, maybe 4 in the day. 3
straight through.
So a big 20 to 24-hour shift.
4. I think we were going to try and do 4-4-3, weren't we, on days 1, 2, and 3. But we were in the middle of a storm.
Was it Storm Dennis?
Was it Storm Dennis?
Storm Dennis, yeah. I remember it very well.
Yeah, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. It was just not conditions that you would want to climb up Nevis in. And so
I'm gonna say it was the worst thing in the world.
Well, it certainly got worse as we got up there. But when we knew that it would be that starting at midnight in that particular storm was going to be a bad idea. So the very first thing that we did on
90 mile an hour winds and minus 19 at the top, just for reference in terms of what we were dealing with. And we were lucky enough to have the mountain rescue guys very much on our side. Again, eternally indebted to them. They were absolute heroes. Yeah. And they politely said, lads, we don't think this is the right decision. So again, what they did was they helped calibrate on our ego on day one, didn't they? Because I think we probably would have thought, oh, we've set a plan, let's just crack on. But that would have been the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. So the very first decision we made in the event itself was to change the event itself, or to change the very start of it. Like, okay, so we thought we'd essentially sit out the night, start very, very early the next morning, and see if that storm would move a little bit. And actually, on day one, it hadn't moved, but it wasn't as bad when we first set off. No. If you remember on the first summit.
Yeah, the first one wasn't as bad.
But I think as we got through that first summit and into the second summit, we'll come back to the first summit in a minute. Some interesting things happened physiologically on that, wasn't there? But as we got through to the second summit, the storm had really picked up, and that made that very first day one of the hardest days out of the whole thing, wasn't it?
I think that the highlights from day one were Jonny and I were 3/4 of the way up the Ben, which we've done about 15 to 20 times in training at this point. We both sort of looked at each other thinking, this feels significantly harder than it should. And retrospectively, we actually looked back and realised that because the wind was so aggressive, planting our feet and then staying balanced and stable was actually putting so much additional demand on our legs and poles and just general bodily control. Each step was using a significant amount more energy. So the amount of energy expended up until that point it wasn't just like walking up the stairs. It was like walking up the stairs in a boat that's flipping over.
Well, somebody's trying to push you out that boat.
Yeah, or somebody's trying to push you off the stairs as you're walking up. So that demand over and over and over again meant that we kind of just shared a moment when we went, ooh, eye to eye, like, are you feeling as bad as I am? And he went, yes,
good,
yes,
that was good for me, because you saying, do you feel as bad as I do? And I went, yes. I went, fuck, it's not just me.
So that was the real first highlight. Obviously, it was we were wrapped wet with rain. Weren't we? It was just awful, like just soaked through. No waterproofs in the world that would have actually helped us at that point. And we had a Marines Matin leader with us who was chirpy and cheery, but aware. He did say it's the worst conditions he's ever operated in. Like, as in the worst, the most unpredictable and most sort of changing as we went along. And then on the way down on rep number 2, shall we say, AMRAP Ben Nevis, we met somebody on the way back up who we had to make the decision on, is one of us go down and actually help this individual.
Yeah, that was. We were really quite close to the top of the second summit on that first day, weren't we? And we found a young lady clung to a rock, who, upon sort of interview, if you like, it was, or we were asking, are you
polite
okay?
Interrogation.
Polite interrogation. That's a good way to put it. Are you okay? Yeah. Are you really okay? No. And so I decided to take her back down, which was tough, because obviously there was a bit of carrying, there was a bit of guiding somebody down as the mountain rescue. Far worse experiences than me will tell you. It's tiring and it takes a lot longer. And I was obviously,
and when you're soaked through
already. So by the time I got to the bottom on day one of the second summit, I had mild hypothermia. So not for the first time in my movement career, but it was that was pretty brutal day one. And I think that although it had taken a while, the conditions hadn't been great, so we were slower than we'd expected. Our 4 summit wish was quite quickly and realistically cut to 2.
Funnily enough, the demand of the 2 was enormous. Like the following day, we were hobbling down the stairs and had another moment of side to side eyes, like, surely not. Surely we can't feel this bad. Surely we're making this up. But it was.
I felt particularly ill.
Yes,
I remember that.
And it was so the routine, just for clarity, from that point onwards was. Every morning, alarm went off at 3 till 4 was sort of grunting, groaning, showering, getting ready. 4:15, there was breakfast on the table. It'd take us quite a while to eat that because we were just trying to get as much food in us as possible. And then it'd sort of be kit checks, getting everything sort of wrapped up, packed in, bag checks in the bag. Off we go, aiming to start for 5:36 each day from that point onwards. And then by day 2, day 3, we're not going to go into detail of each day because there's a very good documentary that you can go and watch on my YouTube channel which explains it in more detail. But it just became relentless from that point, where we got more and more broken down. The routine became fairly solid, But day 2, day 3, we started to become quite aware that actually plan A that we'd set out to achieve, which was the vertical marathon, started to look a little bit out of reach without a lot of bending here or contingency there or extending the project. But then we decided one of the big lessons, and this is something that I still sort of chant to myself as a matcher sometimes when I get a little bit too lost in my own planning, is that we control the plan doesn't control us. So we set out a rational, logical, on paper approach to the mountain and the approach that we were going to take to it, and then Storm Dennis came and kicked us right in the balls, and we had to take the ego out of it, take the athlete out of it, look at what the project was there to do, which was to try and encourage people to speak more openly about their mental health within the context of Movember, raise as much money as we could, and to encourage people to keep taking steps forwards. So if we let our ego get in the way of that, it would have become a vanity project. And once we start to really understand that, we start to enjoy it a lot more. We start to feel under less pressure. We start to be able to take each day as it comes. We start to look at things and be able to enjoy the view rather than just thinking, oh, it's in the way, let's crack on.
I think we also recognized that we became the recipients of our own message.
Yes,
amongst that. That was a really interesting experience, because we could have looked at the fact that the plan itself had started to become, untenable. It wasn't really going to happen. We tried, but we further and further away we got, the more we had to admit this isn't going to be the case. So what do we do? And we had to adapt. We adapted our plan, but we didn't
keep showing up.
Yeah, and that's what we did in the end. It was like, well, what would you do? What is the metaphor here? Is that, if you're faced by what seems like an insurmountable challenge, and that could be in the form of a mental health issue or simply your own closed off inability or lack of will to communicate to another, we were now in a position to say, well, if you feel like it's insurmountable, what you should try and do is just to keep moving forward,
one step at a time,
and to rely, which was the message that we felt that we carried well throughout the whole thing, was to rely on that support network and rely on that team. So whilst we were up there as two individuals climbing this thing over and over, and the focus was ostensibly on us, the reality was that we became very much part of a moving mechanism. We were simply cogs in a machine that the others were managing, and the outpouring of love, the direct support from Mountain Rescue, from Doug and the team, from Gaz, from the lads at Through Dart, from everybody that looked after us overall, was huge. And without that, we wouldn't have taken another step, because in isolation, we could have looked at this and gone, well, we can't do this. What do we do now? Well, if we can't do it, let's bin it.
Yep.
But when we realized that it wasn't really about going up and completing 42,000 meters, that was, again, ostensible. It became really a very different prospect, and one we're about to talk about the highs and lows. I think maybe grab a couple of each out of that, but certainly that was something that was very life-changing, I would say. There were moments in that which were
and they're stuck with us. Yeah. I think 3 highs, 3 lows each. Keep it short and sharp. 3 highs for me: the sense of community and brotherhood that came with it, because it was a real team effort. The fact that we went up 22 times in 11 days and never had the same summit once. By that I mean the setting, the snow level, the view, the cloud inversion, the people, the congestion, the wind. We didn't have the same summit once, which meant it was a very unique experience each and every time. And thirdly, the amount of utter dismay that I felt at points, that things were over, the pain was insurmountable, that this was all a waste, that this had all been for nothing, that I was a moron for even thinking about taking this on. And then getting up the next morning and going again was a real high for me, because that was a real victory. 3 lows, broadly, the descents. I think by day 5, day 6, they started to get worse and worse and worse, and I started to have bursitis in one of my knees, where it was just locking up completely with swelling, and it became more and more painful, to the point where we started to adapt up the hill very efficiently. And then you went from being absolutely buzzing, what have you, fantastic, great work, gentlemen, to turning around and then spending the next 4 hours on tenterhooks, really tight, fearful, as if somebody was about to punch me in the stomach, because I was in so much pain through my knees. I was just so worried, and every step was for 4 hours. And that got worse and worse. That was a pretty big low. One morning when I woke up at 3, having barely slept because I was in so much pain, and then trying to sleep in the sort of sciatica position, where you sort of sleep in an L shape with your legs on the bed, and then falling back asleep for an hour and a half, and somebody thought, let's go and check on Fergus, and I'd fallen asleep on the floor, which was quite funny, but also I then felt very guilty for the rest of the day that I'd put us behind schedule a little bit just by trying to alleviate my back pain. And is that two lows or three?
Great. That's two, but it was great. That's a high for me, getting that extra half hour. There we go.
And number three, the low was, I was actually told medically that I was no longer able to continue up the hill on day 10. So we actually only managed one summit that day. And that was a pretty low moment for me because I felt like I'd let the side down, like I had underestimated the challenge of it. But at the end of the day, on paper, we did the calculations that we could. Storm Dennis came in the mix, and that really put us in the back foot from day one. So once I was in the bath, warm, toasty, and not climbing down a hill again, I actually started to feel a little bit thankful that I'd been medically discharged in this sense. But the immediate feeling of being told, Fergus, we do not recommend that you continue today, put me in a bit of a slump. But again, the overall message was, if you are feeling like that, the support network and community around you can help pick you up, and that's exactly what they did, because very quickly I realized that the whole purpose of the project was to put across that message. So in fact, this was as invaluable for me as it was for the purpose of the project itself. Jonny, 3 highs, 3 lows, go.
Well, it's difficult to pick them out, really. The 3 highs, I think an easy high was that sense of community. And although it wasn't a momentary high, I think the whole thing was lifted beyond a certain place because of that. There were moments where we knew that people were looking out for us, and all we had to do was keep walking. I think another high is the same as the low. So I'm going to do a high and a low at the same time. I think it was day 3. Talking about injuries, it turned out afterwards I had ruptured a bursa and 2 grade 4 tears or something in my shitty knee that's already bad. And I'd slowed down loads, hadn't I? And I was really struggling on the downhills, close to tears, really. And when we got down into the wagon afterwards and we all sat round, I was in a position where I felt like I'd ruined it for everybody. That maybe I shouldn't have taken it on, knowing how bad my knee was in the first place, and shall we cut me loose? And I was very upset and very down about it. I think you see that in the documentary, in fact. And the instantaneous kind of right, wrap that, Jonny. That's a load of bollocks. Whichever way it goes for you. Nobody here thinks any less of you. You've come here, you've tried. If you end up being swallowed into the support team to let Fergus carry on, that's fine. If that happened the other way around, exactly the same thing. Address your positivity here, and if you can, let's just crack on. I was kind of given permission in that moment to be miserable, to be sad, to cry a little bit, and given that kind of proverbial and tangible hug, and then given the option to crack on if I wanted to, and I did so. I think that was between summits that day, in actual fact, and I think we went back up again.
Yeah, we did go back up. Yeah, that was in the mountain rescue truck at the bottom, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, and went back up again. And so in that incredible low for me, where I thought it's done, there's no way I can continue, which was as much psychological as it was physical. I was gifted a high, which I won't forget, which was just this sort of outpouring of direct support for me, which could quite easily have nobody needed to do that, but people wanted to do that. And that was just a sort of a moment of pure love that I got. I think I'd echo for you, another high would be just this changing summit. The mountain was ever changing. I think I'll bastardize this or get it wrong somehow, but there's no man crosses the same river twice, for he's not the same man. And it's not the same river, and I tried to paraphrase that for the gram at one point. Was saying we didn't climb the same mountain twice because that was a question we had, wasn't it? Was how are you going to cope with the fact that you're just repeating this thing over and over? And we thought that was going to be a big hardship, but in actual fact, we never repeated it. We were never the same men. Day after day, we had changed each day. We had new experiences and new thoughts to explore, newfound understanding of ourselves. And the mountain just looked different, a different scattering of rain, a different person with us, as you said, a different snowfall, a different bloody sheep that popped out or whatever, kamikazed himself to death off the side. Whatever that did happen. Yeah. Whatever it may have been, or just that moment watching the farmer manage his sheep. We had different experiences every day in the same environment, but it was a very different mountain every day. So I don't know how many highs and I don't know how many lows I've done there, but I think ultimately the high was just the outpouring of love. And for me, as woolly as this might sound, none of the lows have remained lows. They have been able to kind of manifest great highs from them, and that kind of absolute horror of not being able to continue, and the pain didn't go away for me at all. But my management of it was completely propped up by that love that was around me, and I don't think I'll ever forget that.
I agree, and I think that the reflections that we've carried through are pretty dominant, to be honest. I mean, from a personal point of view, we are completely open and honest with each other as a result of having gone through that experience. It means there's no ego, there's no masculinity, there's no barriers that comes through that, which from a friendship point of view is fantastic. From a professional point of view is fantastic. And we're very lucky to be in that position. From the core crew that was there, they fall into that category as well. There's some boys that we haven't seen in a while. We've seen them recently, actually, where it's just immediately like that. Yeah. We spent 11 days whilst the rest of the world was sort of going into chaos around us again, just as Christmas 2020, I think, was when all the lockdown stuff started to begin again. And we were sort of starting to get a bit uneasy, but we were away from that for a little bit, which is an amazing thing. But from a reflective point of view, we know the value that putting ourselves in that uncomfortable position gave us. We put ourselves really on the brink. And like we discussed in episode number 2 around ultramarathons in general terms, that teaches ourselves a lot about ourselves. And it's things that we can carry through with us into our day-to-day lives, which feeds into the sort of final point that we wanted to cover today, which was the power of community. Mm-hmm. Whether it was in person, whether it was remote, the support that project received and the support that we received was incredible. And we can still often get quite emotional about it now because it really, really was amazing.
Easily, yeah. And rightfully so, I think.
Yeah, rightfully so. We had the core group that gave up time, effort, finances to come and help us just at a moment's notice and just really own the project. We had the brands that sort of just chucked things at it on merit and really got involved where they could. We had the sort of media PR side of things where people were just picking it up and just helping it push. We had November, we had all the support, and then we had all the people just from social media that come to join us on the hill. People drove from Devon, people drove from Preston, Liverpool, just on their ones, just to come and say, you know what, I like the project. This is important to me. It's great to be a part of it.
There was a high that fits right into your community element there. Do you remember those 2 chaps came across, I think, from Glasgow? And we were we were the soup. Yeah, we were coming down the mountain, and these 2 fellas, hey, how you doing? And we were just chatting. We were meeting people on the mountain all the time. People that just happened to be claiming Ben Nevis, and I think up until our second slug of soup, we thought that we had met just some people claiming Ben Nevis. They were chatting to us, and hey, would you like some soup? And maybe I was slow in the uptake, but it suddenly became apparent that they had come to Ben Nevis in order to find us, to offer us soup. Yes, that's what they were there for. They made soup specifically.
The soup's for you.
And
we're like, what?
Oh, how do you mean? No, we made this for you. Oh, so you knew we were here? Yeah, we've come to Glasgow. So these guys had travelled all the way from there. I mean, from Glasgow to Fort William. It's not like to the end of the
3
street.
Hours,
a 6-hour round trip.
Yeah.
They'd come to meet us in order to say that they appreciated the message, not specifically us, but they knew we might be cold and wet, and that nobody doesn't like soup all of a sudden. And
very good soup.
Very nice.
For that matter.
Lentil soup, I think it was, wasn't it? Very, very cool. And there were other people that just stood out for me now, but there were other people that travelled from a distance to come to us. And going back to that, the outpouring. We still get messages now. People who have watched the documentary or people who have followed us for that amount of time who say, I still think about what Project Vertical did for me, looking in on it, and I think that in itself is a fantastic
gift. Important to mention at this point that we're in no way trying to say, oh, look at what we did, look at what we created. I think it's very much a case of we took a lot of the things that we know are valuable to us and our mental health as blokes in this modern world, tried to apply them to a concept, to a project that then could be digested by others. Mm-hmm. And we believe and seem to have the metrics to suggest that landed well with the interaction and the stuff that Johnny's referenced there and the other things from the community point of view for other people to experience the things that we know as valuable. So we just created a mechanism to allow others to explore the things that we've come to realize through our own experiences. Mine through a negative experience when I was younger with my own mental health and a suicide attempt, and Johnny's through having significantly more years on me to have come to the realizations and self-awareness that allowed us to create that project. And it really was amazing to have people come on board to just help, whether it was push the message around the mountain, around the conversation starting, whether they were doing their own physical challenges, whether they were using the statistics themselves, whether they were doing it all in one day, whether they were doing it disparately. We had people all over the place doing mad stuff just as part of the Climb Your Own Mountain sort of banner, Hashtag, whatever you want to call it.
Jem, who climbed the steps outside her office.
Yeah,
Thousands of
climb
times.
that.
I saw those steps.
Jem from Elliot
Thanks so
Brown
much for
climbed
that.
the steps outside their office and pool up and down to the height of Nevis whilst we were going up. And
That was insane.
Yeah, mad. I was crying on, it was like day 3. I was just crying on my Instagram stories, just thinking, this is mad. What an amazing thing that people have sort of pulled together for. But the bigger message there is, just how important community is for us. It's very easy for me and you. I know you've got, I think having the kids probably actually might help a little bit here. I'd be interested to hear your take on this. But for me, a lot of my training is on my own. And it means that sometimes I lose sight of how valuable it is to share these experiences with people. If I'm really in a hole on the long run or something, or on the bike, I come in and I sort of share it with Erin, and I've got that immediate sort of confidant I can share it with. But not training with people, not experiencing these things with people, Project Vertical is something I always remind myself of, just how valuable that community and that support and that shared purpose is. And I brought up the kids there because it means on the day-to-day stuff, when things are really hard, you've got that the family unit around you, which means that if you're out on a long run and you're coming in, you've got that immediate sense of decompression from having that little crew together in that sense. But I think there's
no decompression with 4 children.
Okay, my mistake. That's naivety.
I get exactly what you're saying. I do understand exactly what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, the long and short of that is it makes you appreciate what you've got so much more, because that whole everybody banded together, the whole community came together. The money, which is just a positive flow of energy. If you look at it,
we've seen what it's done as well.
Yeah, exactly.
We have seen where that money has gone and where the funding has gone. That came off the back of us being in that position, and it came off the back of those people that ultimately made it what it was. We were a conduit by the end of it, and very fortunate to be in that position. And I think that's kind of going back to, we get messages and things. It's interesting to look at it so far out from how far it had been, that what we were trying to say has been said, and people are still benefiting somehow from it, and in that sense we're very, very fortunate to have benefited ourselves from having the opportunity to be part of that. It became bigger than us, and it became way beyond what we had expected it to be, but it seemed to maintain, if not grow, the positivity that we had hoped it would. So yeah, we've still both got very sore knees, but it was ultimately it was a success. Yeah, I think as an overarching summary, just to echo what Jonny said there, I think we just really wanted to put across this message, and we don't want that review or that summary to come across in any way as just a sort of measuring something we once did, like a middle-aged Floridian telling us that he could bench 405 in high school when he's 6 cores light deep, that sort of old tale. But we are still very proud of that project, still very, very grateful to everybody that's involved, and it's been an interesting experience sitting here trying to recall memories and break it down. So we hope you've enjoyed that. If you have, do make sure that you have followed and subscribed. Well, followed or subscribed, depending on what platform you're listening on. Make sure that you have rated and reviewed, if you have the option to, on whatever platform you're listening on. If you're watching on YouTube, hello, please make sure you have subscribed, drop a comment, and tell your friends.
Tell your ma.
You had to ruin it.
She may want to know.
She might, to be fair, if your mother is interested in this. Mother, Jonny, this is a family-friendly thing. Okay, anyway, there we go. He's ruined it yet again, as he ruined Project Vertical. I hate him. I'm just kidding. We gained a lot from that mountain, although I don't think I'll be returning back to Ben Nevis anytime soon, having been back to it recently.
Yeah, forget it.
Forget it. It's done. But I still have the Strava segment. Thank you, and goodbye.